Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for a discussion of the book In Praise of Walking. Before we begin, we want to express our stand in solidarity with the Black community. We admit we have very few words to offer except to express that we hear you and we mourn and demand justice alongside you to dismantle structural racism and inequality. At America Walks, we are taking a hard look at how we can do better, and we invite you to join us and inform us. In our webinar today, we will turn to brain science to help us better understand how and why we walk, and we will keep an eye on how these revelations can help us heal communities. So thank you for joining us, and let's get started. I'm Kate Kraft, the director of America Walks, and I'm joined today by my colleague Kelsey Carr, operations and development manager for America Walks, and our very own board chair, Kevin Mills, whose day job is vice president at Rails to Trails Conservancy. We'd like to thank our sponsors listed on this slide or this screen. We cannot do any of our work without their support, and we are internally grateful. Before I introduce our speaker in today's topic, I want to remind you that you can find a closed captioning link in the chat box should you want to use it. And we're very much interested in your questions to join us in this conversation. So please add your questions to the GoToWebinar chat box. We will get to as many of your questions as time allows. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Shane Amara. He is a professor of experimental brain research at Trinity College and is joining us from Dublin. He is the author of the newly published book, or at least newly published in the US, entitled In Praise of Walking. We're going to spend about 30 minutes hearing from Shane as he outlines the key points in the book, and then we will continue the discussion with Q&A, so don't forget to send us your questions. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you. I'm just going to show my screen and get going. So as Kate said, I'm joining you from Dublin, which is the capital of Ireland. It's about 6 p.m. in the evening here, so we're a few hours ahead of you in terms of the approach of the evening. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak to you about my new book, In Praise of Walking, which was a little bit of a labor of love for me because I so much enjoy walking, as we will discuss over the course of this talk. So what I want to do over the next 25 or 30 minutes is just give you a sense of what this book is about, dip into some of the topics that are in the book, and I would be delighted to have your questions afterwards. Okay, so let's set some context. And there we go. Okay, so I'm sure many of you recognize this character. This is the John Cleese character from the Ministry of Silly Walks. And above it, I've placed a quote from the British anthropologist John Napier. And he says that human walking is a unique activity during which the body step by step teeters on the edge of catastrophe. Now look at Cleese as he's walking. He undergoes some very remarkable transformations of posture, and yet he's able to nod and capture the attention of somebody else who's walking by him, and we all have a good laugh at this. So there's an element of truth to the idea that we teeter on the edge of catastrophe, but mostly it's not correct, as I hope to demonstrate over the next little while. Now, let's journey back a very long way in evolutionary time. We're land dwellers, and our primary experience of locomotion, of course, is on the land, and it's natural to think that walking first evolved on land. And it turns out that that's not correct, despite our bias towards land dwelling. And we know this from some very recent genetic studies. So let's just look at the ocean floor for a moment. There are lots and lots of bottom dwellers that walk on the ocean floor. You've got here on the On the left of the screen, the rosy-lipped batfish, which has these wonderful protrusions that it moves along the ocean floor with. And on the right, you have the translucent or almost transparent sea pig, which has obviously lots of limbs that allows it to move around on the ocean floor. And there are many, many other creatures that walk along the ocean floor, millipedes and crabs and a whole variety of others. Now, let's just think about walking for a moment. On the left of the screen here, you have a ventral view of the skate, and you can see that it's moving along the bottom of this tank that it's contained in. And on the right here, we have some mice running around. And the question, and a natural question is there any relationship between the gene complex that controls the expression of the pelvis and these limbs in the skate, and similarly in the mammal? This is a cold-blooded creature that lives in the bottom of the water, and the mouse is a warm-blooded four-limbed mammal that lives on land. So they're very divergent in terms of evolutionary time, somewhere around about 400 or 425 million years, according to the molecular clock. And it turns out, when you compare the genetic program that controls the expression of the pelvis in the skate and the limbs in the skate, that these are identical in the mouse. Indeed, they're identical in the human, with the interesting exception that when nature wanted more of something, it simply doubled it. So you've got forelimbs and hind limbs in the tetrapod, namely the mouse. In other words, the same gene complex supports the expression of limbs in both of these species, who are divorced from each other by unimaginable amounts of time, about 420 million years or so ago. In other words, the program for walking first evolved underwater. It did not evolve on land, or as had been formerly thought, at the margins of the water and the land. Now, let's move from evolution to development and think about getting up on your own 2 feet. It's very difficult for those of us who learn to walk early in life to remember just what it was like to learn how to walk. And it's interesting and surprising that we know so little about it. Karen Adolph at New York University has been doing marvelous work on the development of walking in infants and in toddlers over the past decade or two. And this paper of hers summarizes how you learn to walk. You make thousands of steps per day, and you have many dozens of falls per day. Now, how do you demonstrate that? Well, this is how you do it. You take children to a walking laboratory, which has a gait mat, plenty of cameras in order to track their movement. And you track the movement that they make. You can see this in the panel B here below in 3-dimensional space. And you code how much walking they do, what type of steps, all of this kind of thing. Quite a complicated task to do. But what this shows you is remarkable. That locomotor experience in these children is absolutely immense. The average 12 to 19-month-old takes somewhere between or around about 2,300 steps per hour and falls approximately 17 times per hour. Now, this is a remarkable thing if you think about the transition that a crawling infant makes to making these kinds of uncertain steps. At around 9 or 10 months of age, you are able to move on 4 limbs. You're in a position of great stability, and you are very unlikely to fall over from that position. And at around about the age of 10, 12, 13, 14 months, something like that, an obligatory transition occurs where humans stop crawling, start sitting, start pulling themselves up, and they move into a position where they are now ever so slightly unstable, but their world changes. One of the major things that happens at this point is that their ability to engage social attention changes, because they can now freely point to other places and have their caregiver or playmate follow the focus of their attention by or through their pointing. So what you have here, of course, is what's referred to in the psychology literature as time-distributed variable practice. And this is how we ordinarily learn to walk. And the transition we make is really quite remarkable. We become very, very fluid in a way that robots and other artificial walkers are not able to do yet. And we can do this. This is from Mary Hayhoe's lab. And what she does is look at how we know where we place our feet when we're moving around, for example, on very, very rough terrain, as you see in this case here. And the walker is carrying a mobile laboratory, one that measures the position of his eyes, so you know where he's looking, and a laboratory on his back, which you can see also. He's moving at quite a speed and eventually comes to a terminal position. And you can see that there are points on his limbs, at his elbows, his knees, his shins, that track the position that he makes in space. Now note the foot placement. You put your foot down on a rock without actually being able to know whether it's going to be stable or not. So you have to make that estimate ahead of time. And this is how you do it. You adopt a slightly forward stance and you flick your eyes out and your eyes flick back. You can see that on the top left here. And you do this in something like 1/5 of a second. So your positioning of your feet has already been determined by the input that your eyes have received and the estimate that your brain makes about the stability of the surface that you're about to place your foot on. So it's really, really quite a remarkable achievement. And as I've said, we can't get robots to do this particularly easily, especially not with this sensory motor integration where you have visual input combined with movement and feedback from the feet regarding foot placement. Now, it's often said that going for a walk is something that's very, very enjoyable, but that it may also act in some way to make you feel better. I know certainly from my own walking experience that one of the best ways of shaking off the stresses and strains of the day is to go for a good walk in the evening. Now, is that true? Do we have any evidence that it's true? Well, there's quite a bit of evidence, both from individual experimental studies and from population level epidemiological studies, that activity through the form of walking in particular is a very good thing for you, both for your body and for your brain. So this is a very elegant little study by Miller and Krizan at Iowa State University. And what they did here was ask students to come to the laboratory and their job was to judge the beauty or otherwise of buildings around the Iowa State campus. So they were either given pictures to look at or they were brought for what's referred to as incidental ambulation, to go and have a look. And they get them to fill in a few questionnaires about how much they like walking and all of that kind of thing ahead of time. And what you find is that even during incidental ambulation, people's self-reported well-being goes up quite dramatically after they've engaged in a walk as compared with the group that are sitting. Now, you might reasonably ask, is this a generalizable phenomenon? And we have lots of data now from a wide variety of studies. I've chosen one here from Australia, but there are many, many others like this, looking at the relationship between taking some degree of physical exercise, typically going for a walk, and how that prevents the likelihood of the onset of major depressive disorder, which is one of the scourges of mental health in the modern world. And what they show in this study is that for every level of activity above the most sedentary in the population, now this is a population that has been selected for having no disorders going into the study, engaging in at least 1 hour a week of activity, usually walking, prevents about 12% of future cases of depression. So this is quite a remarkable effect, and the effect size is approximately the same as you get for cognitive behavior therapy and for drug treatment. So a non-pharmaceutical exercise-based intervention, in other words, activity, reduces the likelihood that depression will appear in this population. And there are many other studies which demonstrate this, that exercise appears to be a very good prophylactic against the likelihood of the onset of depression. And there are some more recent studies showing that even in the case of subsyndromal depression, that it also seems to have a marked effect in that population as well. Now, it's been known for perhaps thousands of years that walking is something that facilitates creativity, or at least that has been asserted. So if I might come locally, and I hope you will indulge me here, this is William Rowan Hamilton, a mathematician at my institution at Trinity College, and he invented the theory of quaternions in the 1800s. And quaternions were without use until the last 50 or so years, and now they're used widely in physics, particularly in computer gaming and computer graphics, but also, remarkably enough, in electric toothbrushes to solve the problem of dual rotation in an electric toothbrush. Hamilton was a renowned walker, and there's a Hamilton walk held in Dublin every year. And he used to walk approximately 2 hours from the observatory in North Dublin, because he was the astronomer for Ireland at the time, to Trinity College at the centre of Dublin, a walk of about 2 hours, and he would think about quaternions. One day, he finally hit on the equation, having thought about this for many years, and had forgotten to bring his paper with him. All he had was a tobacco knife. So he cut the equation into Broom Bridge so that he wouldn't forget it, and then came back and wrote it down later. And there's the equation: I squared equals j squared equals k squared equals ijk equals -1. In his autobiography, he wrote this most marvelous sentence: "Here there dawned on me the notion that we must admit a fourth dimension of space for the purpose of calculating with triples. An electric circuit seemed to close, and a spark flashed forth." So that's the aha moment in creativity. Now the question is this something peculiar to Hamilton, something peculiar to mathematicians, or is this something that we all can avail of, that walking might facilitate creativity? Well, there are lots of ways of studying this, and I've chosen one particular study by Marilia Pezzo and Daniel Schwartz at Stanford University. This is a very, very clever experiment where they look at creativity, and in particular the effect walking has on creative idea generation. So the standard approach to studying creativity in the lab is to ask people to come to the lab, hand them household objects, and ask them to generate alternative uses for those objects. And if you carefully match the amount of walking that people do, so you bring them for a walk or you make them sit for a period of time, and then look at the number of uses that people are able to generate, what you typically find is that having walked, you generate about twice as many divergent uses for common objects compared to having been seated. So there's an important lesson there, that getting up and moving actually facilitates thought. They were very clever in this study. They did versions of it on a treadmill where you had to sit on the treadmill and this kind of thing, and they got exactly the same kinds of results. In other words, movement and walking in particular facilitates creative thought. Now, let's turn to a different topic and just think about how we get around in the world when we're moving. It's natural to think that perhaps vision is the most important sense for navigating the world. And this has been disputed within psychology and neuroscience for many decades now. So here's a famous paper by Jack Loomis at the University of California a number of years ago. And what they did was a very clever task where they asked people who were blind from birth, people who became blind as a result of accident, so adventitiously visually impaired, and people who are normally sighted but wearing blindfolds, to complete triangles. So they would be walked along two limbs of a triangle, and their job was to walk back to the origin. And it turns out, actually, performance across people who are visually impaired, either from birth or people who are who became visually impaired later in life, and normally sighted but blindfold, it is approximately the same. People are very, very good at doing this task. And what they show or claim in this paper is that the results provide little indication that spatial competence strongly depends on prior visual experience. So how can this be? Well, there is an answer, which is here in the vestibular system. This is an end organ contained in the head, whose job it is to detect the movement of the body through space and to remember the movements that the body makes through space. And it does this remarkably well. So I'll just focus on a study by Alain Berthoz and his colleagues at the Collège de France in Paris. What they did was take people and put them in a Robuter wheelchair, blindfold them, and make them wear earmuffs. And then they imposed on them velocity profiles. They were triangular or square wave or trapezoidal. And your job is to move the robot through the velocity profile that you have just been exposed to. And it turns out people are remarkably good at doing this. When they are given a stimulus of a movement of a particular type, the response mimics that very, very well. Here's a triangular waveform, and these are attempts to reproduce the triangular waveform, trapezoidal and a sinusoidal. The key point here to remember is that the vestibular system gets input from the visual system, but it can operate independently of the visual system in order to allow you to represent three-dimensional space as you move through it. And the point at which these two systems converge provides important information to the brain about whether or not you're moving correctly in space or not. Now, if we ask what happens when you're asked to walk in conditions of whiteout, either in the desert where you don't have access to the sun, or through a dense forest in conditions of fog, or on an airfield, what you find is that when people have no distant landmarks or distal landmarks to look at, they stop walking straight, they start walking in circles. And it appears that the vestibular system represents straight lines up to a distance of perhaps about 80 or 90 meters, and then it becomes progressively more miscalibrated. It needs an input from the visual system, but it can just as equally be from any of the other systems. So a sound source, for example, can help localization. And the brain is remarkably good at putting together these different types of signals in order to generate a corrected motor movement towards a target. Now, I want to talk about cities for a moment. This is a picture of our urbanizing world. And you can see Eurasia and North Africa at night are very, very lit up because humans have spread so promiscuously across the planet. And the share of people living in urban areas is now well north of 55 or 60%. So a majority of humans are now living in cities and towns, which is something that has only happened recently in our presence on the planet, only since 2017 or so. And this is a remarkable experiment that we're undertaking. But what it means is that by definition, most of our walking will be urban. In other words, it will be in our towns and cities. And I want to add to this something that's sometimes forgotten, that everywhere you look, people are living longer. So this is data from Information is Beautiful, going back from 1960 up to 2015, and you can see that there's been an extension in average life expectancy everywhere you look, with the Japanese currently living the longest on the planet at about 83 or 84 years on average. This brings with it a challenge, and a challenge that I think has been forgotten by town planners. When you think about how our towns and cities are designed, they're typically designed for the movement of people who can walk 1.2 meters a second at crosswalks. And it turns out when you actually look at the speed that older pedestrians are able to cross the road at, that they walk much more slowly than this. And typically crosswalks are not designed for this older population, despite the fact that this population are going to be the majority population, or at least a substantial fraction of the population over the coming decades. So this is just one study demonstrating this by Laura Asher and her colleagues in the UK. They studied about 3,000 adults aged 65 plus, and they showed that 84% of males and 94% of females tested had a walking impairment. and that the vast majority of the adults that they tested walked below the necessary speed to cross the street. So this is a design feature of our towns and cities that traps people who are not able to move at the same rate as people who are younger. This is my hometown, Galway, on the west coast of Ireland. And a recent freeway design, we call them motorways, but you call them freeways, shows the intersection of the motorway with the edge of the city. And what they've done here is built a system that requires an able-bodied person 14 minutes to circumnavigate. There's an old person's home just beyond these trees in the top right, and there are shops on the bottom left. So what has been overlooked here completely are the needs of people who have mobility impairments. And these can arise for many varieties of reasons, from aging to visual impairments and to many others. But street design of this type does not take account of the needs of individuals with these kinds of problems. Now, let's ask a question about street design. How much do you walk? This is a very nice study by Tim Aeltoff at Stanford University. And what they've done is grab smartphone data. And there are really two conclusions I want to focus on here. The Japanese walk the most, and people in Saudi Arabia walk the least. This is not because of the heat. It's because they're very poor sidewalk provision in Saudi Arabia. And of course, Saudi Arabia does have migratory tribes. And in the Western world, generally, we walk comparatively little, somewhere around about 4,500 or 5,000 steps a day. 100 years ago, the average workman in London walked about 10 miles per day. So there's a huge difference between what we used to do and what we do now. We've designed movement out of our world. And you can see this by focusing on the difference between high walkable and low walkable cities. High walkable cities are cities where the facilities of everyday life are close by. You can walk out your door to your local shop or whatever it happens to be. Whereas low walkable cities require a car trip. And you can see that across the course of the day, in a high walkable city, people walk more. These are cities with a high walkability index. And that's true during the course of the weekday, but it's also true at weekends. People walk more in highly walkable cities compared to cities that are relatively less walkable. Now, I want to talk about city design just for a moment. These are two very ancient cities. I've had the pleasure of visiting Istanbul. I've never been to Erbil, which is the oldest continuously occupied city. And you can see that the design of these cities has densely packed alleys. There are shops, there's intersecting corners, all sorts of things are going on all at once. And by contrast, you have a vision given to us by Le Corbusier for the Ville Radieuse, where you have these very, very spread out buildings separated by wide boulevards. And you got the chance to build a version of this in Chandigarh in northern India. Now, what I want to do is just mention briefly the effect of urban design on health. Glasgow is a city in Scotland, in the UK, and the Glasgow Effect gets a wiki page of its own as well as a World Health Organization bulletin, because it has the worst health status of any major city in Northern Europe. Even when you account for deprivation, so if you take cities that are similarly poor in England, Manchester or Liverpool, what you find is that deaths for all categories of disease are greater in Glasgow compared to deaths in Liverpool and Manchester, which are similarly poor. And it's true even for accounting for levels of relative deprivation or affluence. There's quite a remarkable difference. This has been studied for many years now, and an interesting conclusion has been come to, that first of all, even in the most affluent suburbs in Glasgow, which are about 15% more affluent than equivalent areas in Liverpool and Manchester, you still get, sorry, I've misread that slightly. You have higher levels of death in those cities or in those areas. The many papers that have looked at this have concluded that something else is going on. It's not just socioeconomic deprivation. Many people have suggested that it's actually the urban planning decisions that have been made. And what I want to do is blame Le Corbusier just for a moment. Glasgow was probably the city that went the furthest in the UK in terms of adopting the Le Corbusier model. It cleared out its inner city and built new high-rises. The result has been the destruction of social capital and the destruction of social networks, the kinds of things that people were able to do prior to the destruction of their cities. This is Taormina in Italy. This is my preferred vision of a city, and I will admit it is just mine. But what I want to do is suggest that all our towns and cities should think about design principles that allow people to move whatever way they can around those cities. And I've suggested the acronym EASE. Our towns should be easy to walk, but they should also be accessible to all. That means designing in to our towns and cities facilities that allow everybody, including mobility impaired, people with visual problems and all of the rest of it, to move safely around. And our towns and cities, of course, should be enjoyable for all. Paris is experimenting with this, with the so-called 15-minute city, where cars are being removed from the city, and the idea is that within 15 minutes of stepping out of your door, you should be able to find your doctor, you should be able to go to get your food, all of those other things. Now, what I want to do is switch gears and come back and talk about the brain for a moment. You've probably never thought about this. Why do you have a brain? Now, if I put this a different way, what problem does having a brain solve for you? That's maybe a slightly more comprehensible way of putting the problem. Now, if you think about it, trees don't have brains, grass doesn't have a brain, the hedges don't have brains. So there's something about having a brain that's important. This is a sea squirt, and I'm going to talk about the sea squirt for a moment. The sea squirt is a very beautiful picture, as you can see. When it is a larva, it has a spinal cord. It has a proto-brain, and it can tell up from down. Here's a cross section. You can see its cerebral vesicle, the area where its brain is. It has a heart, it has an intestine, and it has a spinal cord, which puts it in the same phylum as we humans, who also have spinal cords. But it transitions. It makes a really remarkable transition where it sticks itself to a rock, and gradually over a period of a week or two, it transforms itself from being able to swim, being motile, to being sessile. And one of the first things it does is it absorbs its own proto-brain as a meal. In other words, if you're not moving, you don't need a brain. So the brain does solve a particular problem for you. Now here's I suppose a small hero of mine, Homer Simpson, in his preferred pose. And if you like doing what Homer does, which is to sit around a lot, well, it's important to understand what it might do to you. And this is why I think we need to try and build movement back into our lives. This is a study by Rémy Demangel in France. And what they've done here is look at what's known as dry immersion. You're placed in this waterbed. You don't move for a couple of days except for breaks to the restroom. And what they find is that after 3 days in healthy young adult males in their late 20s, that muscle volume decreases, muscle strength goes down, and muscle viscoelasticity drops. In other words, 3 days of muscle disuse has malign rather than benign outcomes. And this is because of something that we've recently discovered, really quite remarkable, that there's feedback from muscles to the brain and vice versa through these wonderful molecules known as myokines that help regulate resilience in body, but also resilience in brain, and they help maintain muscle mass. In other words, I hate to say it, but being Homer Simpson is actually bad for you. This is what we should be doing, sitting less and walking more. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shane. There's a lot to unpack there. So we're going to get started with some questions, but can you talk a little bit before about what motivated you to write this book? It's not in keeping with so much other of the work that you've done.
Yes, and I'd be delighted to. Let me just share my camera here so you can see me. The reason I wrote this book is very straightforward, actually. I love to walk, and it wasn't obvious to me that I should write such a book until my literary agent said to me I should write a book on walking, because when I went to meet him, I had done a big walk just prior to that in London, and I felt like a right fool when he said it to me, because it was obvious that that's what I should do. I knew the literature. I had been interested in understanding spatial mapping in the brain for quite some years, and I got the chance. I thought this is something I should do. Nobody has told this story. It's a remarkably interesting story, and it's one that really should be told.
Great, thank you. Just a quick reminder, do send your questions from the in the question box that you see on the screen there. You know, we're a network of walking advocates, and you do mention in your book that neuroscientists, brain researchers should be part of every city planning and development team. So tell us exactly what the neuroscience brings to that team. Why should you be at that party?
Well, there are two reasons, I suppose, really. One is neuroscientists are citizens just like everybody else. And we have a right, in that sense, to have our voices heard. But the other key point really is that neuroscientists know lots. I haven't talked about it, about things like cognitive mapping, how we understand and move in our world. We know now lots about the impact of design decisions on our mental health and on our physical health. And these typically aren't part of the conversation that is being held and which is being had about how movement should occur in our towns and cities. If you look at development plans for the various towns and cities and see what proportion of the budget is being spent on sidewalks and on making streets into beautiful destinations, you'll see that it's comparatively little, even though it's quite clearly the case from everything that we know about brain function that we need to incorporate elements of green design, so things like trees and all of those kinds of things into our cities. And we need to make our cities interesting so that people find them as desirable places to want to be and to want to live.
Thank you. Kevin, are you going to join us? I know you have questions that are coming in from the transom. So you may be on mute. Okay.
Thank you. So Shane, with COVID-19, more Americans are walking for exercise and mental well-being, though often with anxiety about encountering others along the way. How do these competing emotions balance out? And how will physical distancing guidelines impact your findings and recommendations?
Yeah, so a paper has come out literally today on the impact of COVID-19 on walking, which is really great to see by a colleague of mine in Trinity, but also some colleagues in the USA. And what they found is that initially, when you track movement, people's level of walking fell and general level of activity dropped. But as the people have adapted, and this is something we shouldn't forget, humans are remarkably adaptable creatures, walking levels have started to rise again. So there is the anxiety about meeting others when you're out walking, but we know that outdoors, the load of the virus that you're likely to be exposed to is very limited to non-existent. So keep the 2-meter guideline, sashay quietly around the other person, be mindful, catch their eyes. I actually think in some respects walking is much nicer now because we're actually attending to each other rather than little screens in our hands.
Yeah. So, so one question that came in is, how do we design cities for seniors to be safe and independent? You had mentioned about crosswalk timing, but maybe you can elaborate some on that.
Yeah, so I think there are really two things to think about here. One is the design charter that towns and cities have. Is it baked into guidelines at the start that your towns and cities must, when money is being spent on adaptations, that they are designed for this population? So I can't speak to the US experience. I'm sure it's different from state to state, but our laws here in Ireland require that footpaths, or what we call footpaths, what you call sidewalks, are adapted for the needs of the visually impaired, and they're also adapted for the needs of people, of the elderly. So crosswalks in the cities are raised. They're at the same level as the footpaths, so you don't have to step down. So that reduces the fall risk. The button that you must press, which I loathe that you have to do that, but is large and it makes a noise. So the people who are visually impaired can hear the amount of time that they've got to get across the street. And I think it's building in lots and lots of small features that enhance individual autonomy. But you have to have the budget available to do this. And you must bake into your design principles at the start that you are going to do this. So it's a requirement under the city codes that this happens. If you don't do that, the rest of it is just talk.
In your book, you spend quite a bit of time looking at the evidence of walking in nature and what it does in terms of the restorative nature of that. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? And you talk about the different types of nature or the different types of outdoor walking.
Yeah, so I'm sure you have the expression the leafy suburbs in the US, and leafy suburbs are expensive, whereas concrete suburbs typically aren't. And there's a reason for that. The market tells us that these are better places to live on average. There's been a great study done on mental health in Germany just recently, looking at people randomly assigned to apartment blocks by the town council. And people on one side who have a view over a park versus people on the other side who have a view over a freeway. And what you see is that people who have lots of nature in their daily lives, who are randomly assigned to it, have much better levels of mental health. There's much less prescribing of prescription drugs and all of that kind of thing to that group versus the group that are randomly assigned to the other side of the building. So nature exposure is important. The question is how much and what other variables kind of impact on it. So we know a little about this. I don't think we know anywhere near enough, but the data that we've got suggests that being exposed to nature for as little as 2 to 4 hours per week is sufficient. And what you're exposed to probably doesn't matter a lot. A nice city park, if you have access to that, is probably fine. But seeing green, seeing trees, seeing all of those kinds of things, bird song and all the rest of it are all vital components of it. And people self-report when you measure these things using a smartphone, that just the mere experience of walking through a city park makes them feel much better. But I think we kind of know this, this is why people golf or play golf.
So Shane, so there's been some increased interest in walking of late. We're interested in how we maintain that increased interest in walking as life returns to normal for more people. And perhaps related to that, there's also a question about how might we lead more people to walk for utilitarian trips.
I'm not going to ever suggest we should blame individuals. We need to blame our built environment. If walking is easy for you, you will walk. If it's the default, you will do it. So a simple example, the building I work in, when you walk in the door, the elevators are in front of you. To get to the stairs, you have to walk through 3 fire doors, which means that the default is that people take the elevator, they don't take the stairs. The same principle is true everywhere else. You know, if cars have primacy, people will take their cars. If it's not safe to walk, people will take the car. So this is actually a big job of reconstructing how we think about our built environment so that it's easy for people to walk. And probably you've got other issues. You know, it used to be that city zoning meant that you had a business district, you might have had a district for shopping, and then you have a district for living. And actually mixed use districts facilitate people to move around much more easily than they would have done. But again, these are big, you know, almost century long, certainly decades long jobs where redesign is concerned. But, you know, you got to take the first step.
I want to give, we had mentioned to folks who were attending that we would be giving away some of your book. Or, thank you to your publisher for making that available. So we did a random selection of folks who are attending the webinar. And Kelsey, you want to tell us who will be getting a book?
Sure. Thank you all so much for attending. So our special winners today are Herminia Rodriguez and Sydney Sepulveda. So we will be reaching out to you two via email for your physical address.
Great. All right, thanks. We just wanted to make sure we did that before we got too much further along. I don't, Kevin, do you have any more questions?
Sure do. So one just came in about how walking may or may not help in the effort to reduce obesity levels.
To reduce obesity levels?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So there's a kind of an important context to put here. I don't want to engage in too much advertising, but chapter 2 of my book deals with it in great detail. If you look at humans who are living what are known as ancestral lifestyles, so they're in South Africa, or in Africa rather, or in South America, what you see is they typically walk very large, a very large number of steps per day. They will walk perhaps 10 or 12 or 14 kilometers or something like that over the course of the day. But their energy consumption does not vary very much compared to people like us who are living in a much more sedentary world. And that gives us an important clue, which is that the problem is that we think that by exercising, we're going to burn off the excess calories from the food, especially the ultra-processed foods that we're eating, and we won't. And there's another issue, which is that as we evolved, food sources have always been historically rare. It's only in the modern world that we've solved the problem of food provision. There's food everywhere now. You can get cheap calories very, very easily. And our tendency is to eat and then conserve energy. That makes sense if you're in a resource poor environment, but we're in a resource rich environment. So the unfortunate truth, regrettably, is that we have to have a shift away from ultra processed foods towards foods that are much less processed. And we need to reduce the amount of calories that we eat per day if we want to tackle obesity. On the other hand, walking is good for you, independent of all of those things that I've just said. It's good for every organ system in the body. We're built to profit from regular movement. Unlike our closest primate relatives, this is not often thought about. Chimps sit around for most of the day. The great apes sit around for most of the day. And that's because the food that they eat and the metabolism that they have is designed for this. Ours is designed for movement. And if I ask you to look around the room that you're in, how many chairs can you count? I hate to do it in the room that I'm sitting in, but there are too many. We have designed opportunities for lack of movement into our environment, and we've designed opportunity for movement out. And this is because our brains are very good at taking shortcuts.
Kevin, I understand we've gotten just lots and lots of questions, so yeah. I don't want to use our questions when we have people who have.
Yeah. So, what about walking and talking? So one questioner had said in their own experience, they feel like that adds to the health benefits, to have a good talk while you're walking. Does your research back up that perception?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the problem is we've got a single verb, which is walking. But actually we engage in lots of different types of walking. So you can walk for cardiac health, which means you're walking at a speed where it's difficult to talk to somebody. But clearly, if you've got a problem to solve, if you have a relationship with somebody or whatever, you walk at a different speed, and the synchronization that you engage in when you're doing that movement is quite different to the kinds of synchronization that you engage in if you're walking for health. If you look at people who are walking, take a short-legged and a long-legged person. What you typically see is the long-legged person's gait shortens and the short-legged person's gait lengthens a little, so that you're walking at the same speed, so that you can talk together. And we know it's an act of passive aggression if one person walks too fast and the other walks too slowly. This is one of those things that you shouldn't do. And walking, therefore, facilitates kind of a social synchronization, which is good for us. And social walking is, of course, one of life's great pleasures. So yes, walking with another person is a great thing to do.
Okay. So what about folks at work? Someone wrote in that, in their workplace, people get plenty of breaks, but nobody's using that as an opportunity to go take a walk. What might they do to, help inspire their coworkers?
Again, I'm going to blame the environment. I'm not going to blame the individual. There's a new generation of walking desks coming in. There are quite a few designs out there. So you can build in movement into workspaces, but there is a kind of a social inertia. If the place that you're working in involves everybody sitting down, getting up and breaking the social norm is a hard thing to do. If you have an office to yourself, in my case I do, I have an alarm on my laptop that goes off every 25 minutes, and I get up and I go for a walk in order to do that. And I think it has to just be normed. The leaders of the organization have to make this a normal thing to do. It should be okay to have walking meetings, to have standing meetings, to have a walk around the corridors and work at a board in the corridor or something like that. And again, this comes down to kind of leadership. But some of the buildings that you look at, the Apple building has apparently, I've never been in it, but I hear that it has a marvelous walking corridor. Microsoft's European headquarters is not very far from where I live, and they've designed the building so that there are stairs everywhere and people walk all over that building. So the design of the buildings that we're in make a huge difference.
Right. So what would you suggest be the fundamental mindset for transportation planners, right? There's often the fundamental goal of moving, vehicles more quickly through a city. What would you suggest as a reform in the way transportation planners think of their job?
Oh, everybody will hate this, but I think we should abolish parking. You've nowhere to park.
Probably not
in having a car. But look, that's kind of a flippant remark.
Yeah.
The investment in safe mass transit is something that has lagged behind public demand everywhere you look. There are very few countries that have got ahead of this. Singapore have done a great job on this. Here where I live, we've done a half a great job and a half bad job. So we've put in a wonderful tram system, but we haven't built enough of it, and demand on it is enormous. And we have a very good light rail system that I take to work every day, or I used to until the disaster befell us. But we've spent an awful lot of money on freeways, which means that people commute for maybe 2 hours to the centre of Dublin, which is ridiculous in a small country. So mass transit, clean, safe, reliable, all of those kinds of things, that needs to come, and then just abolish parking.
All right, so how can we use the mental health benefits of walking to advocate for more walkable cities? And would your recommendations on that differ by country?
So how can we use it? I think, you know, again, this comes to kind of policy demands that are placed upon our towns and town planners or city planners, but also upon our politicians. You know, so you can mount a utilitarian argument if you want, which is that we will spend much less on mental health services and we will have much more economically intensive cities with happier people if we have that kind of density that allows people to interact with each other. And I think that's a perfectly good argument. I think there's similarly a perfectly good argument from how we are built and designed as humans. We are designed to move around, and optimum design of our towns and cities should reflect our ability to do that and allow us to profit from it. But that's, again, a complicated problem. You know, who's going to listen to you? You'll know whether they've listened depending on how they reallocate their budget.
Okay, we are kind of getting to the end of our time here. I just wanted to give Shane and Kevin both the chance to make a final kind of closing remark, and then I've got a couple of things to end us with. Kevin, do you have any observations or thoughts?
Well, sure. I mean, Shane's research is really fascinating. I appreciate the opportunity to learn why walking's so enjoyable, stress reducing, productive. That's and you know, fundamental to who we are as a species. I really think we can use what we've learned here to be better advocates.
Thanks. Thank you, Shane. Any closing remarks?
Well, just to say that walking is our unique adaptation. We walked out of Africa some 150,000 years ago, and we spread all over the planet. And we did that in family groups, in tribes. Not one person walking off into the wilderness with a spear. It's so at our core, walking is social, and our walking is very good for us in ways that we know, and in many ways that we simply don't know.
Thank you. I want to get back to my slides and once again thank our sponsors for supporting this work. Thank Shane for bringing his wisdom and being up doing this later in the day for him. We really appreciate you doing that. Our sponsors for making it possible. I want to thank all of you for participating, and what an amazing group you were. We got lots and lots and lots of questions, and we'll do our best to try and get them answered. I want to thank Kevin for joining me today and helping manage all of the questions you sent in. Just to give you a preview of a few things that are coming up, we have on June 10th, our next webinar, Enhancing Walkable Places Through Public Art. So we hope you can join us for that. And also at the end of June, we're going to feature tribal transportation planning and pedestrian safety. This webinar will provide an overview of tribal transportation planning that will be followed by the return of our Walking Toward Justice series later this summer, when we'll discuss missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the role of accessibility in walking. So thank you once again for joining us. Please complete the survey that you will get at the end of the webinar. We do use that information to help us improve what we do and to help us decide on future topics. So with that, thank you all, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Thank you.